Hello, everyone, and welcome back to calibration training. You've made it through another round, and you are becoming an expert in your own uncertainty. And you'll be able, at the end of this training, to provide estimates for our model building, which is what we really hope for here. So I want you to take a moment now, once again, to write down or share any feedback you have for group 3. Thoughts, feelings, doubts, anything at all. Let us know. And keep track for yourself of how it's going. And I want to introduce you to another really powerful tool that works well for me when I'm working on this difficult problem of providing estimates, and it's called Klein's premortem. Klein and his team have been working on this problem for quite some time, and the idea is that we can use perspective hindsight to imagine that an event has already occurred. To help us make better judgments. It's the idea is that this is used in medicine. It helps us to increases our ability to correctly identify reasons for future outcomes, also with measurable effect. And the idea of this pre-mortem, or this perspective hindsight, is that we work on the assumption that the patient has died. So in medicine, they use this to have a little meeting and say, okay, that went well, but imagine that the patient died, or imagine that didn't go well. What would have been the cause? And this can be applied for our upper and lower bounds. So individually, to think about each of these bounds and to say, okay, given my lower bound and given my upper bound, right? Now I get the answers. After I answer the question, I find the true value. And it's actually, let's say, if we're talking about the lower bound, it's actually below my lower bound. Now I can tell myself the story. Why is that the case? And it'll help me update my thinking about the lower bound. And for the upper bound as well, if I say, I name an upper bound, and then I think about Klein's premortem, and I think, okay, imagine that I get the true answer, and it's far above my upper bound, right? The ocean depth is much deeper. The population of Australia is different. Et cetera, depending on the questions that were being asked. The upper bound is really wrong, and the true value is outside of my bound. So we think about these individually, apply Klein's premortem to those upper and lower bounds, and think about why they're wrong, and then tell yourself the story of why they're wrong and adjust accordingly. So I'll give you an example of a rock and roll band called AC/DC. And the question here for this example is, how many albums has AC/DC sold as of 2021? Had they sold as of 2021? The first estimate, maybe 10 to 100,000. Ask yourself, why is this wrong? Why is 10,000 why is 10,000 quite wrong and 100,000 is also quite wrong? We can tell ourselves a story. Maybe AC/DC is just a small garage band, or maybe albums mean something really specific, or maybe something else. Maybe 100,000 is much too low because maybe they're world famous and they're selling a lot of albums. Maybe by 2021 they weren't very popular anymore and they lost a lot of and they had sold a lot at some point, but that wasn't so much in that big span of time. So we may reduce the lower value, the lower bound, and increase the upper bound based on this thinking. If we really don't know, then quite a large range is going to be realistic. It's going to be helpful. And so we think, again, this is just an example with AC/DC, this Australian rock and roll band and their album selling, but essentially we think about that upper bound. We work with the premortem and we think about that upper bound and we think, okay, why is that too low, or why is that wrong? Tell ourselves a story and think more, switch on again, system 1, try to think hard about what the upper bound means and why it could be wrong. And the same for that lower bound. So quickly, just a quick checklist. As you apply these tools, the equivalent bet, the Klein's premortem, I want you to try and be systematic about applying the tools. These tools and subjective probabilities can be much more realistic if you keep these biases in mind, if you switch on your critical thinking and try to make this give us realistic values. Most people tend to use their previous estimation habits, even though we've taught you about the equivalent bet, Klein's premortem, we told you that we're trying to look for broader ranges. People tend to go back to their previous methods. But if those didn't work, then why would they work in the next round? Abandon those old practices and try to apply these new practices. Use Klein's premortem, and think about what you've done in the past. You've at the beginning of each session, you've given some thought to how it went for you. You thought you'd do well, but you didn't. You thought you'd give 90% confidence, but typically you haven't yet. So why do you think it'll be better if you keep applying the same tools? So try to get out of that. And try to find ways of anchoring. Try to avoid ways of anchoring on ranges. Don't just think of a single number and then add and subtract a little bit, but really think about those upper bounds and lower bounds separately and try to think how you can apply Klein's premortem, how you can apply equivalent bet to generally what you need to do is to widen those ranges. So think about how you can widen those ranges. Think about how you can realistically give us good estimates based on these tools. Good luck and enjoy and see you in the next round.